Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. This is our board meeting of Tuesday, April the 19th, 2022. We have received regrets tonight from Trustee Patrice Barnes and Student Trustee James Kay. Our moment of acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. The singing or playing of O Canada. Thank you to our students for providing the music for O Canada. I know that we all look forward to the day when those musicians can actually meet us here in the boardroom and we can shake their hands and thank them personally. Before going any further, I would like to remind everyone in the boardroom that when you are speaking tonight, please speak clearly and into your microphone. Also, those who are attending virtually, I also encourage you to speak very clearly, loudly into your computer so that we can all hear each other and understand everyone's message. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we will look at the agenda that we have in front of us. I would like a motion to amend that agenda, or not amend, to approve that agenda. Trustee Barrett?
No, I was going to actually ask for an item to be added, Chair Morton.
And your item would be, Trustee Barrett?
I would like to be able to add the element that has been in the media in the last couple of days, starting in the weekend, with regards to the process of acceptable literature within our school libraries, if I could, please.
Trustee Barrett has put forward an amendment. Could I have a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. All those in favor of amending the agenda? consider the agenda to be amended. Thank you.
Now I will make the motion to accept the amended agenda, Chair Morton. So,
Thank you. The motion has been put forward by Trustee Barrett. A seconder for the amended agenda, Trustee Stone. All those in favor? Thank you. I'm going to go back and question Trustee Barrett. Where would you like your item to be acknowledged?
certainly, it can be as part of the information items would be fine. 14E, because it is information at this point. That would be fine with me.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. We will have your item under information, and it will be E, following the OBSPA report. I'm looking at number 6. We have 3 sets of minutes. I would like one motion to receive the approved minutes of February 22nd and a motion to approve the draft minutes of March the 10th and March the 21st. Could I have one motion to receive and approve? Thank you, Trustee Thatcher, seconded by Trustee Edwards. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on. Do we have community presentations?
We do not.
Thank you. Moving on to ministry memorandums and the information update from Director Marsh. Director Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Morton and Trustee Barrett. I did have my mic on just to say that we're actually starting with the same topic as the item that you wish to place on the agenda. So staff are going to speak. We did seek permission from the chair in terms of taking a bit of time this meeting just to go through where we're at in terms of the review process. And so we'll do that now, and there will be a number of speakers, even though it's the director's update right now. And then I'll move forward with the second update related to COVID. So I wanted to begin by saying that we've started this meeting with the land acknowledgement and recognize the distinct rights of the original right holders, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation and the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. This land acknowledgement reminds us of who our treaty partners are, who the original rights holders are in this territory, and whose lands and waters we are benefiting from. It's an important statement that has grounded the district's work in the rights and experiences of Indigenous peoples. As a public education organization, we recognize the role that the education system has played in causing trauma and harm to Indigenous peoples. We also know, based on data, that systemic discrimination plays a role in the experiences and successes of Indigenous students and disadvantages them. It is for that reason we have identified that at the center of our work is understanding Indigenous rights and to learn about the history and ongoing impacts of colonization, including residential schools and many other discriminatory and racist actions and policies that affect Indigenous students and communities. We need to live up to that land acknowledgement with our actions. Actions that uphold the purpose and intent of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action to actively support reconciliation. The board's recently adopted Indigenous education policy and procedures give us direction on how to do that. As part of our learning about those impacts and as outlined in the policy, this means doing things differently than we have done in the past. We are collectively responsible for doing this work, even though it may cause discomfort. The policy calls on us to take anti-colonial approaches and actions and to actively identify, prevent, and eliminate anti-Indigenous racism. This means making decisions that are grounded in the distinct rights of Indigenous peoples and that center Indigenous voices, self-governance, self-determination, and free, prior, and informed consent. This also means shifting power away from historical structures and educational systems and prioritizing voices of Indigenous students, families, and educators, and in consulting with the original rights holders and treaty rights holders in this territory. We value Indigenous authorship and literature. We became aware of a concern about a book from some Indigenous families within our district and them wanting to hold us accountable to the policy in terms of ensuring that we don't impact their children negatively and cause harm. We are therefore conducting a review based on the complaints we have received, but we have made no definitive decision. The purpose of the review is to engage with Indigenous students, employees, and communities to seek their direction. As outlined in UNDRIP, we must uphold the self-determination of students and families who have expressed these concerns to us. We are listening to the original rights holders to prevent potential further harm to Indigenous students. It is not only to protect students, but also to include Indigenous voices in the review process. We have a responsibility to listen to, respect, and review these concerns, and we are accountable to the communities we serve in this district, understanding that this is complex work and work that is best served through authentic engagement of sitting with and learning from, which takes time and is focused on the process and ensuring that systemic power, corporate power, doesn't overshadow the voices of families we serve who came forward in good faith to us. I'll turn it over to Associate Director Markovsky to share more information about the review process as outlined in the Indigenous Education Policy.
Thank you, Director Marsh. I want to start off by just noting it's important to note that the Durham District School Board has a high number of self-identified Indigenous students who represent a diversity of Indigenous nations. All students' human and Indigenous rights must be upheld. We recognize the sensitivities around making a decision involving an Indigenous author. However, it's our duty and responsibility to respond to and address the concerns that Indigenous students and families have raised, and will do so in accordance with the principles, objectives, and requirements of the DDSB's Indigenous Education Policy and Procedures. We also acknowledge diverse voices and perspectives amongst Indigenous communities, and that applying pan-Indigenous approaches to this will not work. For these reasons, the review process will include engaging with original rights holders, Indigenous students and families, the Indigenous Education Advisory Circle, which includes individuals who represent the DDSB's treaty partners, Kinanal, our Indigenous Employees Network, and with Indigenous expertise. This is a full and thorough consultation process as outlined in the DDSB Indigenous Education Policy to make sure all system resources are properly vetted to prevent harm. The DDSB Indigenous Education Policy and Classroom Practices procedure for teaching and learning was created in consultation with the original rights holders, Indigenous Education Advisory Council, Kinanal Indigenous Educators Network, Indigenous families, and Indigenous policy consultants Kylie Fox-Pelche and Nancy Rowe. Nancy Rowe also provides consultative support and advice to the Ontario Ministry of Education, other districts, and the Ontario Human Rights Commission. We're extremely grateful for her expertise, advice, and support. The decision to review this resource is part of our broader efforts to challenge the way we do things and live up to the guidance set out in our recently developed Indigenous Education Policy, including being accountable to Indigenous students and families, and to address systemic anti-Indigenous racism in our learning and working environments. It's a shared responsibility. I will turn it over to Superintendent Elmhurst, who leads our Indigenous Education Department, for more information.
Chimigwech, I do apologize for having my camera off today, as my bandwidth is low. So I hope that you can hear me okay. and that you can hear me throughout. And if any member of the team or Nancy wants to support if the sound is quiet, please feel free to let me know. Inimbozo, Ogitchtakwe, Indigenous, Gigo Todam. I'm happy to be here with everyone today to share some information related to the work we're doing within Indigenous education in the Durham District School Board. Over the past 5 years, the Indigenous Education Department has spent time in community building trusting relationships with Indigenous students, families, employees, and community members. We are fortunate to have built relationships that guide and support the work of the DDSB. As we together work to interrupt colonial structures and barriers and promote and protect rights of Indigenous students, families, staff, to ensure the maintenance of a respectful, safe, positive school environment and actions that support Gidasawin. We do all of the work we do in service of Indigenous student well-being and achievement. Indigenous students and families have graciously trusted us and shared their experiences privately and in small groups about the ongoing impacts of colonialism they are facing within the education system. Relationships have been fostered during family engagement nights, Indigenous student circles, Indigenous leadership camps, and ongoing communication. Families reach out individually for support, and we respond. We are committed to bringing these voices forward as we work together to dismantle systemic racism and engage in anti-colonial teaching and learning practices and processes. We uphold and protect the self-determination of families. With this growing trust that Indigenous families have felt with the Indigenous Education Department, some families have recently shared some concerns about the resources we're discussing this evening. When these concerns are brought forward, swift action will always be taken in protection of Indigenous students and families, which may, as it does in this case, include a review of some resources to ensure they align with the Indigenous education policy and procedure. We are strongly committed to fulfilling our duty to consult and fulfill a process and follow that process to ensure voices of original rights holders, our Indigenous Education Advisory Circle, employee network, and Indigenous families are at the center. These voices have also guided the creation of the Indigenous Education Policy and Procedure as previously shared, as well as the implementation of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit voices, contemporary grade 11 English course, which is currently being offered in 9 secondary schools, with full implementation beginning in the fall at 22 secondary schools. This course focuses on centering Indigenous literatures and also engaging in anti-colonial teaching practices that uphold Indigenous rights. Support staff have been hired to support the implementation of this course. Programming, teaching and learning resources and instructional practices are grounded in UNDRIP and the TRC's calls to action, which guides educators to teach about true histories, contemporary realities, residential schools in the context of colonization, and contributions past and present. Cultural continuity is a focus of weekly engagement sessions. Knowledge keepers and Indigenous guests with expertise in supporting curricular areas are welcome in the DDSB schools, support our work. Culture perspectives are shared in a responsible and measured way. Families have the freedom to make decisions about who their children have access to for cultural teachings, and local knowledges and rights holder jurisdiction is respected. All of our collective work on upholding UNDRIP, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and TRC, with a board-wide focus on curriculum that embeds treaties, residential schools, ongoing impacts of colonization, contributions of Indigenous peoples. As a district, we have engaged in learning with support of policy implementation specialist Nancy Rowe, who is also here with us this evening. Because we know there's a pretty significant knowledge gap for educators, it has been a department priority to engage teachers in learning and about Anishinaabe history, because we are on Anishinaabe territory, and how colonial policies and practices continue to impact Indigenous peoples. We remain committed to working in service of each and every Indigenous student, each and every Indigenous family, and each and every Indigenous community member by dismantling and upholding Indigenous rights. We will continue to engage in meaningful consultation with Original rights holders, our IAC and Kina Now, and Indigenous students and families as we move forward in support of Indigenous student success and well-being. As a team, we are deeply committed to this work, as well as district. We are moms, we are Anishinaabe Kwe, we are community members, and we work together with community, alongside community, in support of community. Chimigwach.
Thank you. So to confirm, we have not made any determination, despite there being a belief that we potentially have. What we are doing in terms of next steps is consulting with the Indigenous Advisory Circle, as well as the Indigenous Network of Educators, to help inform how we move forward in a positive way, given that we did receive concerns from families. And we look forward to that further engagement and understanding that this is complex work, but at the center of it, we know that we all want what's very best for students who are Indigenous and all students in our district, and to close those gaps that occur based on the systemic discrimination that occurs within education and is very well documented, not only in Durham, but in Ontario and across the country. So I wanted to make sure that we were able to provide you that update in terms of where we are with the process and with the implementation of the policy as it is framed out. That concludes that item, and I now can move on to the COVID update unless you'd like to pause there, Chair.
I would just like to say thank you to Director Marsh, thank you to Associate Director Jim Markowski, thank you to Superintendent Aaron Elmhurst for that explanation. We needed to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, I also want to acknowledge and thank some of the Indigenous department who are in the meeting right now, who came just in case we did have some questions. So I thank them, as well as Nancy Rowe, who has been very helpful as one of the advisors to the district in terms of the Indigenous work that we are doing. And I think Trustee Lundquist has her hand up, just in case you missed it.
And thank you for drawing that to my attention. Trustee Lundquist, you have a question, and I'm going to remind you to speak clearly into your microphone.
Well, I'm going to do my best, but you're going to get what you're going to get, frankly. So I'm wondering if it makes sense to actually move Trustee Barrett's item to now. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me procedurally to have a discussion about this now, leave it, and then come back to it when it's all fresh in everybody's mind. So is it possible that we move that agenda item up?
I would go to Trustee Barrett. Would you object to doing that, Trustee Barrett?
That, in fact, if I had known that the director was going to address it in her good news from the system, I would have suggested that we just kind of tie them together. So to me, it would make sense to be able to have that conversation now. But you are chair, so I'll yield to your decision making, but I would say it certainly makes sense.
I think it makes sense to have that conversation now as opposed to later. Would you like to ask a question now, Trustee Barrett?
Certainly, I will start if I could. So I appreciate the information that is brought forward, and I would be the first person to be able to suggest that I have no right or no ability to be able to determine what is appropriate literature and what is not. So I'm going to place all that aside because I believe certainly from that perspective that engaging communities and engaging those that are most affected and influenced by, of course, makes perfect sense. And I appreciate the the boundarizing of that conversation. My concern is twofold. I think one, with regards to the process and the potential of not recognizing that this was going to be potentially an issue that was going to be able to come forward in the media and on the weekend. And so I would have appreciated as a trustee that if we had anticipated that there might be a reaction, that we would have been informed. At the end of the day, we are the governing body. We are the individuals that are responsible for the well-being of this board and the reputation of public education. So frankly, I would have appreciated the heads up and not to have to wake up and read about it in the Toronto Star. So I will tell you, I was significantly disappointed. The second piece is that certainly, as indicated in a number of the conversations that were just held, that certainly there are many communities that are potentially impacted by this. Not only our local communities, but as was mentioned, provincial and across the country. And I have seen some significant I'm trying to find the right word in the sense that there are other individuals that have been impacted by this, perhaps not as not deliberately so, in the sense of not being able to respect those other individuals, but there has been indeed a great deal of pain that has been caused across this country as well from other communities from across Canada that have also reacted to the information that was shared on the weekend and not necessarily responded to. And I guess the last piece that I'd just like to be able to say, I think that we probably could have had a swifter reaction to what was occurring on the weekend in order to be able to come forward with the very things that you are talking about, which tonight makes absolute sense. It makes important information to be able to talk to our communities and to listen to our community. So I thought that could have been very helpful in a response to the media that continued to brew and the social media that continued to brew on Saturday and Sunday. And I appreciate very much the connectivity and the connections that we've made with our Indigenous community. But I would like to be able to understand in a broader sense what other things are happening. And I don't want to mix the two conversations, so I want to stay on this one. But what other literature is being considered for review that also may have some feedback from a broader community. I don't want to talk about that right now, to be quite honest. I want to keep focused just on this at this point, but in a future dialogue, be able to understand those pieces. So those are my comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. I think we should go to Director Marsh for a response.
Thank you, Chair. And Trustee Barrett, thank you for the comments and the feedback. It's all very well taken and agreed upon, so we'll move forward as such. I also want to say that when we talk about the review process, because we don't want to draw conclusions about an individual item prior to the review process and making sure that we're very fulsome in terms of the different viewpoints that are there, it wasn't our intention to publicly impact anyone's reputation. And it was very unfortunate that Penguin Random House emailed us twice, but did not have the appropriate filters on their email. And so it was viewed as a phishing attempt when they were trying to contact a number of the senior team. So we did not see the two emails that they sent us, and there was never any phone call to follow up. So it took us by surprise that that this was in the public sphere. From the point of view of we didn't want to impact a reputation, given that right now we have some complaints from families, but it wouldn't be our practice to then draw into public question someone's work this way.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Trustee Lundquist, your hand is up.
It is. Thank you, Chair Morton. I have a few things I just want to observe about this and a question. So I will advise that I've heard from 2 Indigenous students today who actually feel like their experience has been invalidated by the choices that the DDSB has made. So there is not a uniformity amongst Indigenous students in our board, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, so that there are students within our board even that feel hurt by the decision making or the perceived decision making that has occurred thus far. So ultimately though, and I don't want to get off this topic in the same sense that Trustee Barrett didn't, but I think it's important because we do have a collective responsibility, and I hear everyone loudly and clearly, and I thank you for the presentation about, anti-colonial approaches and actions and the importance of consultation and whatnot. But one of the things I think we need to be clear about is transparency and who the arbiter of material is and how that works, because we have, charter values still of freedom of speech, and I know we certainly don't want to be involved in censorship, and we also don't want to do things that are harmful to Indigenous communities. So I'm really pleased to hear about a fulsome outreach in the public sphere in that way. I think it's highly important. Also giving primacy to the voices of original rights holders in the area. I mean, all of that, it makes sense to me. I think, though, that my question would be, do we have a policy about how these kinds of reviews are conducted? Not specifically this review, but generally reviews of literature or other items in our schools, including in our libraries. And if there is a written policy, is there also a written procedure that goes hand in hand with that? Because I think that if people knew there was a robust process in place, this perhaps would not have grown the legs that it did in the last few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. And we will call again on Director Marsh.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And yes, Trustee Lundquist, in particular, in terms of this particular one, it is the Indigenous Education Policy, as well as the Indigenous Education Procedure on Classroom Practices, Teaching and Learning. So that is what we are following.
Do you have a supplemental, Trustee Lundquist?
I do, thank you. I guess my supplemental would be, within that policy and procedure, does it actually speak to how a review is to be conducted? Because I don't recollect that in particular.
Associate Director Murkowski, I know you were looking at the particular clauses earlier today, so do you mind referencing them? Do you have them available?
I'm not intending on putting anyone on the spot, Chair Morton, and certainly I'd be happy to wait for a response, and it doesn't need to be now. I just am not clear in my mind about what that process is and whether it speaks to it in a robust way, and I'd be concerned about that in light of the importance of the issue of balancing various rights that inevitably will come up in the course of a review of any kind of literature.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton, just to build on Trustee Marsh's remarks. So within the procedure, Trustee Lundquist, there is a specific section that speaks to guiding principles. There is also a section that speaks to the criteria for selection. So when it speaks to the review of materials, it actually references the criteria. I should note, though, that we are in the process of actually reviewing the policy and procedure with the implementation of our Indigenous education policy this year in September of 2021, and pending trustee approval of the human rights policy and accompanying procedures. The actual learning resource materials policy and procedure will also be reviewed to ensure that there's alignment to the Indigenous education policy and the human rights policy. I should mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Markovsky. We have a question from Trustee Stone. Trustee Stone?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Some comments, and I do have a motion that I'd like to put forward. You can't hear me? Can you hear me?
As loudly and clearly as possible.
So I also have a motion that I'd like to put forward after I make my comments and ask my questions. I've been in touch with David Robertson, the author of The Great Bear. You can imagine how disappointed he is. He was wondering why the board hadn't at least contacted him to find out, at least tell him what was going on. And he had let me know that he went to Knowledge Keepers, the Cree Knowledge Keepers, he's Cree, and was given approval for this book. So I'm trying to understand. I know that Indigenous peoples are not a single identity. There's many different cultures. So are these cultures clashing at this point? Like, how does the board figure out what's acceptable and what isn't when Knowledge Keepers have given him approval for this book? And I'm wondering, have all the books been removed from the libraries right now? Are we contacting Crees for their input on this? Maybe you could answer a couple of those questions first before I go on.
Thank you, through you, Chair Morton. So we didn't contact the author initially because our first contact was going to be with the treaty holders on whose land we're on. So our responsibility is to serving the students on this land, and so our review process was going to begin with them. We did not inform him that there were questions yet because it was premature in terms of drawing any judgment prior to the review process occurring. So it was just in terms of where we were in the process. We are just beginning with the Indigenous Advisory Circle, who are the treaty holders on the land that we are on. I guess my question is, did you contact the author on behalf of the board? Because given the situation we're in, it's a delicate matter in terms of how we're moving forward. We have reached out today to set up a meeting with the author, as well as our Indigenous advisor and members of the Indigenous Education Department. So if there's mixed messaging in terms of where we're going as a district, I just want to clarify that now.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I reached out as a trustee to David, told him I was a trustee at the board and concerned about what was going on and wondered how he was doing. So my other questions were around if there are concerns about Indigenous books, so or other books, do they come forward? How do we determine whether or not a book is okay to bring forward into the libraries?
So in this instance, the book was in the libraries and families complained to us.
So going forward, though, will there be books that will be looked at prior to going into the libraries? Like, will the Indigenous Advisory Circle be reviewing Indigenous books prior to them going into the library?
That is correct. The policy that we put out in September did indicate that it was important that as we move forward with Indigenous resources, that the Indigenous voice and the treaty holders of whose land we are educating on would have voice in terms of the selection. So we would vet resources and have curated lists for educators to choose from in terms of appropriate resources and ages, as well as descriptions summarizing them. Superintendent Elmhurst, I'm not sure if you want to add anything else.
I am here, happy to support, of course. Yes, we are supporting libraries. The procedure actually does outline how we currently review library resources to make sure that they are free from harmful stereotypes or narratives that historically may exist in libraries, knowing that some of our content needs to be reviewed. So there is direction in the procedure regarding that. And then we do provide a vetted list of resources and work with the advisory circle on that as well to support educators in classrooms to make sure there was alignment. Working, of course, within the jurisdiction of the territory of which we're on and with our original rights holders, who really are the ones who should be providing the guidance, and also the self-determination of families on what are the resources that they feel are best for their children to be having access to, which speaks to the pedagogical practices we're looking at embedding into our end courses around self-selected texts, so that students can really enter the texts that are most appropriate for them and their identity. A long answer, but yes, we are currently supporting resource selection. The procedure guides that, as well as our advisory circle and employee network.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to put a motion forward.
I have a question for you, Trustee Stone. First, when you approached the author, did you indicate that you were speaking on behalf of the board, or
No.
were you speaking on behalf of Trustee Stone?
Trustee Stone.
Thank you.
I would like to put the motion forward that trustees request that the DDSB staff bring forward by the end of May a report to the trustees around the removal of books, the policy explaining the criteria for doing so, and that the report include all books that have been removed in the last 2 years, including those books that are now in review.
We would need to have somebody second that motion. Could I ask for a seconder, please? Trustee Crawford is seconding that motion. Discussion of the motion. Trustee Crawford, your hand is up. Would you like to question or comment?
No, my hand was up just to second it.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Moving on to Trustee Barrett.
Yes, thank you. And again, not necessarily opposed to the motion, but I might want it in the sense that I think that there's an education piece with regards to this, because I understand that there is already a policy with regards to the review of literature, so not necessarily opposed to it, but I would also like to be able to ensure that what we do in being able to bring forward this report is, because what I've seen, and I'll echo what I said earlier, is that we've created a great deal of angst within a number of communities across Canada. And what I don't want is actually a repeat of being able to create that angst. So if we come forward with a public report that talks about books that we're considering, I believe that what we will do, and I'm not considering because I'm not suggesting there's a whole list out there. I don't want to create another issue that's not there. What I think will occur is some things that I kind of talked against earlier. I want to be able to make sure that what we do is have a process that is equitable, so we don't create further angst. So I don't disagree in the intent that I would like to understand the policy and process. I'd like to understand potentially, what other books are being considered, but I am very concerned about having a public dialogue or a list. I sat through this school board in 2002, 2001, and 2000 when we talked about Harry Potter. I sat in the audience as a parent. I've been involved with this board for some 25, 26 years. And what I don't want to be able to create is the same sort of angst that pitted community against community. I mean, I appreciate what Trustee Stone is bringing forward in the sense of knowledge is understanding. What I don't want to create is a division. So I'm supporting the concept, but what I'd like to be able to make sure is that what we do it within a framework of respect, and in a framework of being able to make sure that we don't go through another Saturday and Sunday like we did, because there are innocent people hurt over this weekend, and I don't want to be able to see that occur. So I'd like a process that ensures that we don't end up in that same place. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett, for those comments. We'll go to Trustee Thatcher, who has a comment or a question.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. I certainly am interested in the policy and procedure as well. I'm hoping that I did understand Associate Director Markowski. I felt he was indicated that at the present time that the policy and procedure was under consideration, in the process of being reviewed. I think we need to carefully consider the wording of the motion, because I'm not quite sure how realistic it would be for us to go back and review books that have been, say, eliminated from our library over the last 2 years. And I wonder if maybe someone could address that. Thanks.
Would anyone like to address the question put forward by Trustee Thatcher? Director Marsh or Associate Director Markowski?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. Trustee Thatcher, to your first point, you're absolutely correct. We are reviewing the policy and current regulation in place for learning materials in alignment to our human rights policy that we're awaiting approval, and the Indigenous education policy. In terms of the second piece, it really is a question we'd have to take back to our innovative education department, see realistically what that looks like in terms of gathering that information, then report back.
Next question, I think, was from Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Lundquist?
Thank you, Chair Morton. I apologize. Before I speak to the motion, is it possible to hear it back in its entirety? I've only heard it once, and I just don't want to be wrong about what I think it says. I guess I'm asking for Trustee Stone to read back the motion, if that's okay, Chair Morton. It was long and it had various pieces, and I just don't want to be mistaken in speaking to it.
Yeah, I'll read it again for you, Trustee Lundquist. It was trustees' request that the DDSB staff bring forward by the end of May a report to the trustees around the removal of books, the policy explaining criteria for doing so, and that the report include all books that have been removed in the last 2 years, including those books that are now in review.
Does that answer your question, Trustee Lundquist?
Yeah, it does. And so I would like to speak to it because I support the idea of having a very transparent process related to the review of books in our schools. I think that is necessary in terms of both the human rights and Indigenous education policy, but also in terms of charter rights that we can't sort of divorce from the context of this. But what worries me a little bit about that is if we have so many books that we've removed from our schools for reasons that we, in the last 2 years, that's a little bit worrisome to me. I would think that that should be something that would be manageable. But the bigger picture issue, which I think Trustee Barrett touched on briefly, and an important one, is if there are books under review and we don't want to cause damage, then perhaps we need to be reviewing the way we conduct those kinds of reviews, understanding that knowledge sometimes moves faster than we're prepared to respond to it, as it did in this particular case. So I think that I could support a motion that was about making the process or the policy related to reviews more clear, so that the public and all would know how exactly this process is undertaken, if it's undertaken. I think that's really, really vital. But the second part, in terms of books currently under review, I'm not as clear on that, because I don't want to land in the exact problem that was identified, I think, by Director Marsh initially and then by Trustee Barrett, which is we don't want to cause reputational harm. We don't want to raise a broader conversation about these books until such time as decisions have been made. And maybe that's not the right place to land in terms of the process or policy, but it seems to me, at the very least, that the process and policy needs some significant reflecting upon. And so I would be pleased to have a report on that by the end of May. I'm just not supportive of the second part of the motion, which is the listing of things, just because of the concerns that have been expressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Moving on to Trustee Edwards.
Madam Chair, did you notice my hand is up?
Yes, Trustee Crawford, I see your hand up, and I'll be going to you following Trustee Edwards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the principle of the motion. I also agree that when we're looking at a report, that we don't really want a list of books for the various reasons other trustees and Director Marsh had said. However, I would sort of maybe put them into categories of complaints under the human rights, if anything, as we've received X number of reports, complaints about, X number of books under these categories, and I think that would suffice as far as that's concerned. So I would say that the motion pretty much can sit, except you don't say actually set a list, but you say including all books that, maybe including a list, categorized by complaint, human rights complaint categories or something to that effect. And I don't know how to rework that motion with that amendment, or if it would be a friendly amendment if you want, Chair Morton.
Trustee Stone, did you want to rework your motion, or would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'm happy to rework it.
I'm sorry, I have a point of order. It's not Trustee Stone's motion at this stage, Chair Morton. It belongs to the board. And so if somebody would like to propose an amendment, they should do so.
I agree with that. That's why my hand was up.
Then I would ask Trustee Edwards to propose that amendment.
Trustee Edwards, you may want to consider the theme of the complaint. Is the categorization by theme of complaint. Not all complaints are associated with a human rights complaint.
Trustee Crawford, did you have a further comment or question?
Yes, I did, and I think I'm satisfied that staff is already reviewing it, and all we're asking to do here is to expedite that and report to us by the end of May. And I think the listing of the books could be quite awkward, and I wouldn't want to see this motion fail because of that. So my amendment was to remove that portion that asks for a list of the books. I'm not sure what your exact wording is, but I think if you get my meaning, is to remove the portion that asks for a list of the books removed. That would be my amendment, and I guess I'll require a seconder for that.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. I think that Trustee Edwards is working on the wording that you would appreciate at the present time.
I'll leave it with her because I trust her.
Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. I agree with Trustee Crawford. If the motion to me is more around, I would be interested more in the policy and procedure portion, as opposed to having a list of books. I don't see that as something that would be agreeable, certainly with me. I would support the motion if the amendment that Trustee Crawford has suggested would be in place, and if that is the case, I would be happy to second the motion.
Thank you. I think we'll go to Trustee Edwards. I think she's got the wording.
I'm hoping I do. So the original motion was trustees request that DDSB staff bring forward by the end of May a report to the trustees around the removal of books, the policy explaining their criteria for doing so, and that the report include books that have been removed in the last 2 years, including those books that are now in review. So this is what I'm proposing. It's that last part. The first part will stay the same. Trustees request that the DS staff bring forward by the end of May a report to the trustees around the removal of books, including the policy explaining the criteria for doing so, and the number of books removed or under review by theme or complaint.
Could I have
by
a
theme of
seconder
complaint, sorry.
for that amended motion?
Yes.
A seconder? Trustee Lundquist, sorry?
No, I don't want to second it. I want to amend it to make it more clear.
I think Director Marsh would like to speak to this.
So not to complicate this unduly, but I was wondering in terms of the Chair of Governance and Policy, whether or not we know we have 3 policies coming forward at the beginning of May to Governance and Policy. Would it be possible then, following those policies, it would come forward to Governance and Policy, which is where it would sit in terms of the work that we'd be doing on it moving forward? So that would potentially set it probably to an early June Governance and Policy meeting. Wondering if that's possible.
I'm thinking that we should go to the Chair of Governance, and Trustee Barrett, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm only the Chair of Governance. I don't make all the decisions on the Governance Committee, but as a trustee, it would seem appropriate to be able to move the policy into the Governance and Policy Committee for review. so that there can be continued robust discussion with regards to that. The element would be the same, and the intent would be the same. It would just potentially move there for the committee for robust conversation.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, we're talking about referring this to a committee. We're partway through an amendment, adjusting an amendment to vote on it. Is it that we're now going to commit this instead?
There isn't, to your point, through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Crawford, he's correct. It's just, it was an idea. It has no legal bearing at this point, Paul, because it's not in the form of a motion. So I agree that the motion that was being discussed is still on the table, so.
Thank you. We do have a motion on the table put forward by Trustee an amended motion. That's right. Could you repeat that, please, Trustee Edwards?
I'm sorry, can I have a point of order again, please, Chair Morton? I'm a little bit puzzled as to what's happening. I understand that there was a motion on the floor. It hasn't been seconded yet. I indicated that I had a desire to amend the motion that was on the floor, and then you just departed from me. So I would like an opportunity to make that amendment.
The only issue, through you, Madam Chair, I would find is that still, until the amendment is seconded, you can't amend a motion that only hasn't been seconded yet, Trustee Lundquist. So
Well, I could bring a separate amendment.
yeah, that's what I was thinking, to amend the amendment. I know it gets convoluted, but so yeah.
We will go back to Trustee Edwards for the amendment. Then I will ask for somebody to second that amendment.
Thank you. The amended motion reads, trustees request that the DSB staff bring forward for the end of May a report to the trustees around the removal of books, including the policy explaining their criteria for doing so, and the number of books removed or under review by theme of complaint.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Could I have somebody who would second that motion?
Madam Chair, I'll second it so that we can get to the amendment.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Is there any further discussion before we can vote on that amendment?
Madam Chair, just point, this is the opportunity for Trustee Lundquist to be able to amend the amendment to the motion. So just hinting, I'm
waiting for.
I'm hinting, Trustee Lundquist. So
Well, I don't know how many times I need to put my hand up to actually ask to do that, but I'll do it yet again.
Are we able to vote on the amendment?
No.
So Chair Morton, I think you would call on Trustee Lundquist now to bring forward her proposed amendment to the motion brought forward by Trustee Edwards.
Could you please repeat that, Council?
Yeah, sure, Chair Morton. I think you would now call on Trustee Lundquist to bring forward her proposed amendment to the proposed amendment brought forward by Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist, your proposed amendment to the proposed amendment.
So I'm hoping that this simplifies it, not complicates it. So I would strike what she had added and instead replace it with, and that the report include a chart which speaks to the themes triggering a book review, and that the report be presented at the governance committee or to the governance committee no later than June 1, 2022. And that would be my proposal.
Madam Chair, if I may, I have to make a point of order. You're you're doing two things here. You're amending the amendment, and then at the same time, you're asking for referral to a committee. We need to get through the amendment, which is, if it was up to me, I would have Trustee Edwards remove the wording after that she was speaking to, as it only confuses things. Remove the wording that refers to the books, to report the books. As she had done the first time, she stopped and then she added words. Now we're adding more words. We could be here a long time. Anyway, you can't amend an amendment and then refer it at the same time.
I'm going to go to Council Cotter for advice on this. Council Cotter.
Madam Chair, if I may, we have experienced voting members here that have some knowledge of procedure. Anyway, do what you need to do.
So through you, Chair Morton, I think there are you have now before you a motion brought forward by Trustee Lundquist to amend the motion, to amend Trustee Edwards' motion rather. That motion, I see nothing improper with that motion requiring the report to go to committee. As Trustee Crawford says, it does complicate it. So you could do it that way, or you could split it and have the motion dealt with with the report coming back here, and then do a separate motion to commit it to committee. But I see nothing improper with the motion requiring the report to go to the committee, as Trustee Lundquist has proposed. So that's the motion that's on the floor. So I suggest you move to see if you have a seconder for that proposed amendment.
Are you saying that we could now vote on the motion that has been put forward by Trustee Edwards?
No, I'm suggesting you call for a seconder for Trustee Lundquist's motion.
Then could I have somebody second Trustee Lundquist's motion? And that would be Trustee Thatcher. So at the present time, we would be voting on the amendment of the amended motion.
Well, it's virtually the same thing because Trustee Lundquist is rewritten Trustee Edwards' proposed amendment. So it's almost the same thing. You're voting on Trustee Lundquist's motion.
I'm wondering if Kathy, could you read Trustee Lundquist's motion, please, so that we all have a clear understanding of this?
If I could just ask Trustee Lundquist to read back, just to make sure that I captured it correctly.
Certainly, I can do my best. I will say I don't have the first part of Trustee Stone's motion written out, and I was not planning on changing any of that. This was really about the list portion of that motion. So the amendment that started with, and that the report include a chart which speaks to themes triggering a book review, and that the report be presented to the governance committee no later than June 1, 2022. But the original part about the policy, etc., would still be in there, of course. I just don't have the language for that, and I apologize, Kathy, if that complicates it.
Kathy, do you have that?
I have that. Trustees request that the DDSB staff bring forward a report to trustees before the end of May. And then I have, and that the report include a chart which speaks to the themes triggering a book review, and the report speaks to the Governance and Policy Committee no later than June 2022.
We have a motion put forward by Trustee Lundquist, seconded by Trustee Thatcher. Would you like to speak, Trustee Edwards, before we vote?
Just a point of clarification, because the original motion, the intent it was that is not, it was to, and I understand the chart, that's fine, that clarifies it, and as far as that's concerned, but it was also about not only the starting of a book review process, but also the number of books that have been removed. We wanted an understanding of that as well. So that part of the motion isn't addressed with Trustee Lindquist's amendment. So I just need a point of clarification.
Thank you. I think it's time that we vote on the motion put forward by Trustee Lundquist, seconded by Trustee Thatcher. Those people who are in the boardroom will use either the red X or the green check mark to indicate their support. Those people who are with us virtually, I would ask that you go to your reactions and use your hand signal to either demonstrate your support of the motion or your lack of support for the motion. So I'm looking for either the green check mark or the red X. That motion has passed. Thank you. That's correct. The amendment to the amended motion is passed. Now we will address Trustee Edwards' amended. Nothing left of your.
You can go straight back to, Chair Morton, you can go straight back to Trustee Stone's motion now for voting on that, on the main motion as amended.
Thank you for that advice, Council Cotter. We will go back to Trustee Stone. Would you like to speak to your motion? Thank you. And your motion was seconded by Trustee Crawford. I think it's time that we vote then on Trustee Stone's motion. Again, I ask if you are at the board table, you would use a green check mark or a red X. And if you are with us virtually, again, the green check mark or the red X. Please and thank you.
I'm sorry, can we have it read back what we're voting on, please?
And your question again, Trustee Lundquist?
Can we please have whatever we're voting on read back to us, Chair Morton?
Can we share the screen possibly? Robert, do we have that? The one thing I'm not sure was originally Trustee Lundquist had an amendment that talked about June governance, and I'm not sure if that was actually captured in the final amendment to the motion.
I think we need advice here on how to proceed.
Trustee Lundquist, we're just getting it put up on the screen.
Thank you, Director Marsh, and thank you, Chair Morton.
And the motion reads like this. Trustees request that DDSB staff bring forward by the end of May a report to trustees around the removal of books, including the policy explaining the criteria for doing so, and the report include a chart with the themes that trigger a book review, and that the report be presented to the Governance Committee no later than June the 1st, 2022. That is our motion. It has been seconded. Trustee Edwards?
You can't have two dates on there. What happened is that the end of May has to be out of there now. That's what Trustee Lindquist had suggested. So that part is gone.
Mr. Surjanic, would you like to address that?
It would generally be, I think, redundant there, end of May, June 1st, but we could, I think it's removed. I think the intent of the amendment was clear.
Marsh?
Thank you. I just want to clarify that the last part of the motion is correct. I thought I heard that it was no later than June 2022. So in other words, we have 3 policies coming forward to policy and governance at the beginning of May. We'll work through those 3 policies, and then in June 2022, we would bring forward this policy. I didn't think it was by June 1st, but I could be, it was June. Thanks.
Madam Chair, I thought, and then Trustee Lundquist can correct, I thought Trustee Lundquist said June 1st.
I definitely did say June 1st, but it was not my intention to have the report actually presented to us in June 1st, but to have it in our hands by June 1st was my goal. So I apologize if I wasn't clear. I mean, there's one thing to have it in the hands of the governance committee members by June 1st so that we have time to review it for a June meeting was my thought, to be honest.
So we are leaving it at June 1st, 2022? The motion is in front of us. It has been put forward. It has been seconded. It is now time to vote. And everyone knows now how they can use their signs and their symbols.
Do you need stadium seating, Chair Morton? Do you need stadium seating? Oh, no? Okay.
And that motion has passed. Thank you. I think now that we can return to the information update, and I will go back to Director Marsh for that.
Thank you, Chair Morton. Agenda setting asks that we bring forward an update in terms of COVID management and in particular around absenteeism in the schools. Last meeting, we had indicated that we were seeing a rise in the number of staff away due to illness as well as other reasons. I'm happy to report that we've seen some stabilization in the last 2 weeks in terms of staff illness. We had got to the point at the last meeting where I reported we were getting as low as 83% fill rates. We're now on average above 90% in terms of replacing staff who are away. Student absenteeism started to increase the week before March break. So for example, the week of March 7th to 11th, 15% of our students were away from school. There was then a small dip following March break in terms of absenteeism, and the week of April 11th to 14th, we're now at 17% of the student population on average away daily. That may be due to illness or other reasons. In terms of COVID management, DRHD has not altered their position in terms of strongly recommending the use of masks when indoors, but has not furthered their recommendation in any way other than strongly recommend that the masks be worn. So that concludes the COVID update. Happy to take any questions on that one as well.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Are there comments or questions regarding the update?
Chair Morton, I have my hand up and I apologize because it won't actually show up. So I'm happy to wait my turn. I just wanted to make it clear I was in the queue, please.
Go ahead, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate that the board has reached out to...
Trustee Lundquist, can I ask you to, I know you're not well and I am sorry, but could you project your voice a little bit stronger, please?
I cannot. I'm sorry. I absolutely cannot. It's the best I can do, so I apologize in advance. I'm trying my best, truly. So I'm just going to say that I appreciate that the board has reached out to Durham Region Health about masking. And I'm going to observe that I've had a lot of emails in the last few days about, both from staff and from parents of kids who are vulnerable, who are very worried about what is happening. And so I understand as a trustee that I have been advised that any change to the masking policy has to be supported by Durham Region Health, and I just want to confirm with council that that remains the view, because if that is the case, then we are stuck with what we're stuck with, which is strongly recommend masking indoors. But I'm puzzling about that outside of the context of students, because there are certainly many employers who have masking policies. And so I'm just trying to understand what the scope of our ability is to actually do something about masking in schools.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton, if I may. So I think the the general legal framework would be the same as we discussed earlier, which would be that the board would, as an employer, at least have the prima facie authority as to masking in respect of ensuring a safe workplace. But they'd have to have, I think some basis for doing that. In a way that differs from the directions from the province in that regard, in terms of a mandate versus strongly suggesting. As for students, it's a little bit different. The jurisdiction's more limited because we're not an employer for students. We would be looking for the support of either the provincial public health or local public health with respect to a mandate for student masking. So subject to any further questions, that's just a high-level summary of the opinions that we've delivered previously on the topic.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 9, the public question period. We have received multiple questions from community members this evening. We will take those questions on the book, The Great Bear, first, and then to questions on other topics. Would you like to do those now, Mr. Surjanic?
Thank you, Chair Morton. We've received 21 questions in total on this topic. Some questions were quite similar of nature, so we'll leave those at the end to be addressed all together. I'll just be reading out all the questions, and then Director Marsh will be responding at the end after reading out all the questions. The first one is, my daughter's read The Great Bear in class. She loved it, as well as the first book, and rereads them often. She likes to know what's concerning so that we can have discussions about it and use this as an opportunity for a teachable moment. The next question is someone who's a professor who teaches children's literature and discusses at George Brown College with his students around censorship, around his children's literature courses. The question there is, why are you acting as gatekeepers and not educators? The third question is someone who's the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee for the Canadian Federation of Library Associations, contacted about a possible censorship issue in the Library Learning Commons of the DDSB, explains that policies in most school districts across the country direct teacher librarians to evaluate and read materials in their library learning commons. It's not a common practice for a school board in Canada to direct school principals to remove specific items from a library learning commons. Is this a process that has been attached to the new district policy enacted in 2021? And what are the guidelines that were used to request the removal of these books? There's just a couple other questions, and the rest are of a very similar nature. This one is, do the staff members who made this decision self-identify as Indigenous, and if so, are they claimed by community? Which Indigenous elders, community members, families, and staff members were consulted? This is important considering UNDRIP, nothing for us without us, and free and prior informed consent. And then the other one here is, I'm an educator who happens to be Indigenous. I'm also a parent. I'm doing my best to uphold rights and shift practices that support the emancipation of students. I believe in what is happening with NBE and vetted resources. All English courses have a selection of texts. Without vetted resources, harm will occur and the graduation rate for Indigenous youth will never improve. The question is that, will the DDSB continue to uphold Indigenous rights, the jurisdiction of families to teach cultural institutions, and take all steps to continue to listen to Indigenous families who lodge complaints and concerns about classroom practices and resources? And the remaining questions were focused on asking why the board temporarily removed the book pending a review. And I'll pass it over to Director Marsh to respond to the questions that we've received, that we've reviewed.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank everybody who entered in a question for this evening. And I think that our opening comments may have addressed many of those questions. Recognize that in part there's been some miscommunication in terms of the work that we want to do and not cause harm for the Indigenous students that we serve within our district. We recognize that all of the comments coming forward reflect a concern that we uplift Indigenous voices. We're committed to this process, even though it may cause discomfort for some to disrupt systemic oppression. I think it's important to note that the Indigenous education policy is different from other resource selections from the point of view of really putting the local Indigenous voice first in guiding the work that we do around Indigenous education. And that was done very intentionally, understanding them being rights bearers, but also understanding the disproportionate outcomes for Indigenous students due to the way that we have educated and talked about Indigenous realities, cultures, and lives. And so we have a responsibility to the children in our system right now that they don't feel harmed by the resources that we're sharing. And I'm not saying that this novel was doing that, but we received complaints that some families felt it was, and that is why we need to do this review. I thank everybody for their engagement. Recognize this is a complex time for us as a district. It's not easy work. It's very challenging in terms of wanting to make sure that every child who picks up a book sees themselves reflected positively and from an asset-based lens. So that is the goal in terms of making sure that we start addressing disproportionate outcomes by making sure that we start by reflecting in a culturally relevant and reflective way. So we will move forward with this work and thank everybody for their engagement, understanding that it can be a polarizing conversation, but feel very assured by the number of comments who really spoke to the importance of valuing Indigenous voice, and assure people that our local Indigenous Advisory Committee is key in terms of informing next steps here.
Thank you. The next question is from Dylan. Dylan, welcome. Hello, Dylan. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. And my question tonight is, last month, back in March, I brought up a question about the bell time review, but since then... Slow down. Talk slowly. Oh, that's my dad right there, guys. But since then, students at Pine Ridge Secondary School have been wondering if their schedule for the 22-23 school year was going to be either the 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. bell time, or it would be moving to the 8 a.m. or to 2 p.m. bell time, or is it going to go back to the bell time I had during the 2020-2021 school year when small class classes were starting earlier, when it was 8:10 to 2:10. How would this impact potentially after school programs and stuff? And that's my question for now.
Thank you, Dylan. We are going to address bell times in a few minutes, but I will go to Director Marsh to see if she has a response for you, Dylan. And I think it's Associate Director Wright who's going to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Dylan. The option that's being recommended later this evening to trustees would have Pine Ridge start at 8 a.m. next year. The intention is that all students at Pine Ridge would have the same bell time. Our transportation procedure highlights the bus ride time should be limited to no more than 1 hour wherever possible, though it is likely the ride times will be much shorter for most students at Pine Ridge. It is unlikely that the 8 a.m. bell time will have much of an impact on after-school programming, as it is only a 10-minute change from what your historical bell time was before the pandemic. But those programming decisions take place at the school level and will be determined by administration and teachers and support staff at your school.
I do have a supplemental question as well.
And your supplemental question, Dylan, would be?
Yes, I do recognize that that we do have a bus driver shortage in the province, but I was looking back and saying, when was the last time Pine Ridge was starting at the 8 a.m. bell time in the morning in any school year? Was it like back in 2008 or was it back in 2005?
Thank you, Dylan.
So, Dylan, I don't have the times back that far. Certainly I can find out for you and get back to you, but I know that the morning bell was 8:10 right before the pandemic started in 2020. So happy to find out when it changed to 8:10, and we'll send you a note.
Well, actually, I do want to make a note was that it actually was 8 a.m. in 2008, and then it moved to 8:30, and then it moved to 8:10. And I just want to say the next questioner is from Whitby, Ontario. Bye, everyone.
Good night, Dylan. Good to see you. Thank you, Associate Director Wright. Moving on, and our next question is coming from Delvine. Delvine, are you there? And I think Delvine is joining us.
Oh, hi. I have just a question regarding the courses. I was thinking this meeting that will be discussed by the end of the meeting. That's why I attended. Regarding the French Immersion High School, that they said that they will have the French immersion in Anderson. I was just wondering, is it possible to have the same courses as Donald A. Wilson that they offered, and they can have the same options and opportunities?
Thank you, Delvine.
Thank you so much.
And we are back to Associate Director Wright.
Through you, Chair, I think perhaps Superintendent Lazarus may respond to that one.
Thank you, and that's a very good question. Thank you for asking it, and through you, Chair Morton. It's essential to realize that the course availability at the school will depend on the faculty, the teachers that are hired. So there could be the same courses, but the courses are going to be dependent on the staff that they hire. What we are going to ensure is that we assemble a well-qualified staff at Anderson as well as at Donald A. Wilson, so that we have a wide variety of courses that the kids can choose from so that they can be successful.
Thank you so much. Is it possible to ask another question?
Supplemental? Certainly.
Yes. Yes. Trying to. I was just wondering, would it be an option to specify one high school just pure French immersion instead of two French immersion school, while the hiring French immersion teachers are so hard now to do so? Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And we will go back to Superintendent Lazarus.
So in order to have one high school, we'd have to collapse courses around this. I'm thinking you're asking about one high school for the system, or just have Donald A. Wilson and be the only high school and not have Anderson, just to clarify your question.
I meant instead of a school with a dual program, which is English and French, will be only French immersion. Like, for example, Julie Pyatt is only French immersion school, and it's a bigger school. But for the high school, we don't have to build, just we have a school, but just pure French immersion. That's what I meant.
So establishing a single-track French immersion school would mean collapsing programs at other schools, and we want to make sure that all schools have are existing at capacity, and so that would be really difficult to do. It wouldn't be effective for us to collapse the program so we could have one French immersion school, because it would mean transporting kids as well from other schools to ensure that that we have enough kids to run a program in one school. So single-track French secondary school is not really a viable option for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delvine, and thank you, Superintendent Lazarus, for those answers. I would now like to go back to Executive Lead Zerjanik, and he's going to read out the remaining questions, and staff will respond.
Thank you, Chair Morton. The first question is in relation to Donald A. Wilson boundary review still. There's a comment attached to the question that hopefully the decision will be for the long term and not be short-sighted with further impact to students. The question is, when will the Donald A. Wilson zoning be finalized? And I'll turn it over to Lisa Bianca, our Head of Facility Services.
Thank you, Executive Lead Zerjanik, and through you, Chair Morton. I'm very pleased to be able to respond that the report will be presented to trustees this evening with a review of the consultation for the boundary review and a recommendation for approval. We certainly appreciate the community's patience while we analyzed all of the input and all of the data that we received and performed the analysis. With respect to sort of, the change, I can assure you, our goal is always to minimize change and maintain consistency for the students as best we can. We need to achieve balance and accommodate future growth across the district. We try and build in, space for growth when we are, developing programs and assigning space for the various programs. However, it's always a challenge as new developments currently unregistered come online, and as well, the number of students that do choose regular and French immersion programming. We do our best to predict, but that is again a fluid item. So, in summary, we sort of certainly try to build in as much room as we can for future growth, but in time, we do have to make these adjustments.
Thank you. And the final question is, with French immersion students being sent to Anderson and Sinclair, might there be space for more special education classes at Donald A. Wilson and therefore lunchroom supervisor job openings? Or is this a question that can't be guaranteed an answer until September? And I'll turn it over to Associate Director Wright to respond.
Thanks very much. The boundary review being discussed later this evening is intended to relieve student enrollment pressure at Donald A. Wilson. And though we will continue to be responsive to the community in terms of special education needs and classes, there will be no additional space to fill. In terms of the lunch hour supports required for special education classes, those are school-based decisions and will be decided based on the needs of students for the next school year.
Thank you, Associate Director Wright, and we'll turn it over to Chair Morton with the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Lisa Bianca, for joining us tonight. I also want to thank Executive Lead Sir Janik, and because he's done a lot of research into the questions for tonight. And we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and that's DDSB presentations. Do we have any this evening?
We do not, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on then to the report from the Committee of the Whole in camera, and I'm going to ask Trustee Thatcher to provide that report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in camera and adopted the motions made at the Committee of the Whole in camera meeting as follows: the disclosure of intimate personal or financial information in respect of a member of the board or committee, an employee or prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian. Chair Morton, this is my report.
And you are going to move the receipt of that report?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. We all need to hear good news from the system. Could we have that good news from the system?
Very happily, I'll turn it over to our student narrators. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the DDSB students and staff, we are happy to bring you the news from across the system.
A huge congratulations goes out to Jaden Stickwood, a grade 8 student at Sunderland Public School, who has been named a Merit Award winner in the Lions Club International Peace Poster Contest for her original design, which depicted a tree growing out of planet Earth with national flags as leaves to illustrate this year's contest theme, We Are All Connected.
Wally, a student from Rosemary Brown Public School, was chosen as the third place winner for the junior kindergarten to grade 3 category for Sparks Art Show hosted by Ajax Public Library in association with Pine Ridge Arts Council. Congratulations, Wally. We are so proud of you.
Kate Biernes, a Port Perry High School graduate who is now a sports broadcaster with TSN, will be among the inductees added to the Scooga Sports Hall of Fame on April 21st, 2022. Congratulations, Kate.
Marianne Oketch, a Sinclair Secondary School alumna, is a cast member on the newest season of Survivor. Marianne is most proud of writing an article for her university newspaper that led to being invited to consult with her university's Equity and Inclusion Officer on creating a better framework and support for Black students at McMaster University.
Durham has its first graduation coach for Black students. Trisha Brown is a new graduation coach at Pine Ridge, and she says a big part of her role is getting to know students and their families. The aim is to build trusting relationships with our students, parents, guardians, and also the school staff, says Brown. We try to help build the self-confidence of these students through the relationship building.
Students from across the district join one another in the celebration of Ramadan. The Muslim Educator Network of Durham, MEND, and student ambassadors have created baskets full of dates, treats, and information on Ramadan and delivered them to secondary principals during the first week of Ramadan.
On March 31st, DDSB students and teachers across the district raised awareness about Transgender Day of Visibility. Classes celebrated the accomplishments of transgender and gender nonconforming people while raising awareness of the work that still needs to be done to achieve justice for transgender people.
Students and staff across the district celebrated International Women's Day. Staff and students recognized the importance of supporting each other, working together, and lifting each other up on International Women's Day and every day.
3 teachers of Eastdale CVI were nominated by students as #Eastdale Excellence for the positive impact they've had on their students' lives. The teachers nominated this month are Mr. Jack, Mr. Knott, and Ms. Coronado. A huge shout out for these teachers and for all that they do.
It is always fun to learn in our Care for Newcomer Children, CNC. A pajama party and reading are just a few of the fun activities children engaged in over the last few weeks. Thank you to our staff who create authentic learning opportunities for our littlest Durham continuing education learners.
Secondary students from DDSB were invited to create artworks in a variety of media formats for display at a showcase hosted by the Robert McLaughlin Gallery in Oshawa. The relaunch of this popular program, co-hosted by the DDSB and the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, featured close to 70 student artworks selected and placed on display at the gallery in March of 2022. Students demonstrated a depth of skill and artistic talent that was met with great anticipation and appreciation by the gallery visitors. Congratulations to the DDSB's talented artists and the educators that support them.
Students at GL Roberts CVI in Mr. Lewis's class were learning how to rebuild V6 and V8 car engines. Tearing down and putting back together these car engines provide an excellent opportunity for students to demonstrate their learning. Mr. Bennett's grade 9 Women in Trade students at Eastdale CVI have been busy constructing walls and learning how to install electrical circuits with a receptacle, a switch, and a light.
The days of significance, as you can see, take us up to the end of May.
Thank you to Mispa and Boyd from J.L. Roberts CVI for reading this month's good news.
Thank you to our students from GL Roberts for sharing the good news. That's awesome. It's now time to move on to recommended actions. The first one is a report from standing, and we will go to Vice Chair Thatcher for that. Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, Chair Morton, and through you. The report can be found on pages 26 to 29. I move that the board now receive the minutes and approve the actions of the April 4th, 2022 Standing Committee meeting.
Thank you. And could I have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Concerns or comments? I see none, so we will vote on that using your red X or green check mark, please. And that motion has passed. Thank you. Moving on to our second recommended action, and that is the Donald A. Wilson Boundary Review. And we would go to Associate Director Wright for that.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This boundary review was certainly a significant undertaking for Property and Planning Department staff, but I'd like to recognize that it was also a significant undertaking for all of the school communities who are potentially impacted by the decision. Dealing with growth in an established school community is not necessarily an easy nor a tidy situation to deal with or resolve, so I'd like to say thank you to all of the many students and staff, including school and central administration, who participated in the consultation process. And with that, through you, Madam Chair, would like to pass it over to Lisa Bianca, Head of Facility Services, and Carrie Trombino, Manager of Property and Planning, to present this report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And through you, Chair Martin. I'm here this evening to present the results of the Donald A. Wilson boundary review process and to request trustee approval to change the regular and French immersion program boundaries to alleviate overcrowding at the school. The French immersion program offered at DDSB schools is very popular in both the elementary and secondary panels. Participation in the optional program is open to all, and the program grows to accommodate all of those who wish to participate. In addition to the French immersion programming offered at Donald A. Wilson in Whitby, secondary FI programming is available at 6 other secondary schools throughout the district, located in Pickering, Ajax, which is 2 locations, Oshawa, Uxbridge, and Scugog. In 2021, these FI programs ranged in size from 113 students at the Port Perry location to 370 students at the R.S. McLaughlin CVI. The immense popularity and growth of this program is nowhere more evident than at Donald A. Wilson. It started in September 2015 and began with 109 grade 9 students and has grown to 721 students in grades 9 through 12 in 7 short years. This growth, along with accelerated new development in the Whitby area during the past 2 years, has placed significant enrollment pressure on Donald A. Wilson, resulting in overcrowding, facility use challenges, and ultimately reaching the maximum allowable occupancy for this building and site. The school and site can technically accommodate 1,892 students. However, there are site limitations on the number of portables, as well as limits governed by washroom capacity and parking spaces. With 1,924 students projected for the 2022-2023 school year, we anticipate exceeding these limits, requiring a solution that will result in a noticeable reduction in the number of students attending the school, and also, very importantly, address the community concerns around overcrowding and the challenges of maintaining orderly and safe common spaces at the school. Review of the utilization of other Whitby schools, secondary schools, found that there was excess capacity at both Sinclair Secondary School and Anderson CVI that could accommodate growth. Planning staff prepared 2 options for review and feedback from the community, recommending a redirection of existing grade 8 and 9 or grade 8, 9, and 10 students in the 2 options that were shared. Staff discussed the proposal to undertake a boundary review with Whitby trustees, superintendents of equitable education, and the principals of the 3 secondary schools and 4 elementary feeder schools. The boundary review was well publicized with a variety of options available for the community to provide input, including voicemail, email, a survey, a virtual public meeting as well. Input provided was considered with key themes being further investigated in the analysis and the recommendations. Staff observed that in comparison with previous boundary reviews, the 35 emails that we received were fewer in number than in past reviews, and that no voicemails at all were received. However, it was noted that the virtual open house or webinar provided greater opportunity to receive and record questions and comments, much more so than the traditional in-person open house, where attendees may have only had the opportunity to speak to a single staff and were not aware of the other attendees' concerns. We had 137 individuals attend the webinar, providing 183 questions and comments, and 41 people completing the post-event survey. Recording of all questions and posting replies on the website offered a more robust response than the in-person conversation that previously may have formed the basis for feedback. The option of replying to a survey was an added venue for input and was well received, with 599 persons participating. Overall, it was felt that a similar level of response was received as in past boundary reviews, albeit by by different means than in the past. The community, through consultation, did request that staff consider applying the boundary realignment to only the grade 8 students. This was one of the areas that we did investigate. And I just wanted to go over that this approach would redirect an estimated 161 students, resulting in a September 2022 enrollment of 1,763 students at Donald A. Wilson, would require 17 portables and still maintain an occupancy rate of about 140%. No relief would be given to the overcrowding and the lack of access to key facilities such as a cafeteria. In addition, given the region's growth expectations, there is concern that the board might be forced to undertake another boundary review sooner rather than later as future developments continue to be approved. This report is provided to the Board of Trustees for consideration and requests approval of the staff recommendation set out in section 8.0 that as of the 2022-2023 school year, the Board of Trustees approves staff option number 1. This recommendation would, over a 6-year projection period, result in an average of approximately 37% of the French immersion program at Donald A. Wilson being relocated to Anderson through the redirection of current grade 8 students and current grade 9 students at Donald A. Wilson. I'll just clarify, those current grade 8 students reside at in the Julie Payette and John Dryden feeder schools. Over the same period, we could achieve a reduction of approximately 20% in the regular program at Donald A. Wilson by relocating the current grade 8 students in the Robert Munch area feeder school, as well as the portion of the Ormiston PS feeder school that is holding for new development, relocating them to Sinclair, as well as the current grade 9 students at Donald A. Wilson that did come from those areas. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments for Lisa? Trustee Stone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for this report. I know a lot of work has gone into it. I just wondered if, and I don't even know if the numbers would have worked out, whether or not you considered moving all the FI to Anderson.
We didn't look at that particularly because moving all of the FI out of Donald A. over to Anderson would have had sort of the same effect, but at a different school. So we would have basically depopulated Donald A. to approximately, off the top of my head, maybe about 75% occupancy, but Anderson would have seriously, would have been up, I would say, 180, like it would have been extremely high. So
thank you. Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Morton, I just have a couple of comments, and I may be repeating some of what has been said, but I think they're really important. The DDSB, as we know, is one of the fastest growing boards in the province, and of course this brings with it new challenges as well as new opportunities. Whitby trustees have been monitoring the situation at Donald A. Wilson for several years now, along with the holding schools in West Whitby. So we know this is one of the fastest growing areas in the region. We've recognized the urgent need for this boundary review. There's more than 30% overcapacity there, 18 portables, congestion in the parking lot, insufficient facilities, and safety issues we recognize. The enrollment pressure, there's certainly enrollment pressure in this school. So we had the opportunity, as mentioned, to have a virtual consultation with our constituents, and there was some concern around the time for consultation, so I'm pleased to hear that the response has been very similar to past consultation processes for boundary reviews. We did recognize that the main issues were basically around the course offering and resources. I just want to say that because of all these pressures and the fact that we're constantly monitoring, we're aware of the situation in West Whitby, and staff and trustees have been active in advocating to the Ministry of Education approval to secure funding for new schools, and we will continue to do that. With all of these things in mind and having considered all of the community input, I solidly support option 1. I believe that's the best choice for us and for our students going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Thatcher. I see Trustee Lundquist's hand is up. Trustee Lundquist?
Thank you, Chair Morton. I am going to observe that I will also support option 1, but I did want to say it is with some reservation, and my reservation is because I recognize that students who are in grade 9 currently have had to live with circumstances that I think we could all fairly acknowledge would have been previously unimaginable. And so I recognize this causes them some disruption that is not insignificant, and I don't want to just let this meeting pass without acknowledging how challenging that their experience has been, but also that this is yet another hurdle that they are going to have to manage, and that's difficult. That being said, I recognize that the options as presented and the explanation as to why other options which we had hoped would be viable, including not moving grade 9s, just are not sustainable in terms of the actions that need to be undertaken. And so I did want to say I appreciate the challenge to members of the FI community, but I would like to just finally say that as a trustee, but also as a parent who had a child in a special program that was moved to Anderson, I had reservations about the school. It's older, etc. And it is a remarkable school in many ways, with an incredible staff and engaged student community. And I hope that those who become students of Anderson CVI and become students of Sinclair understand that that there is no punishment in being sent to either of those schools, but in fact they're going to join really vibrant school communities. And in light of that, I would be willing to move the motion as the recommendation as a motion.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Moving on to Trustee Templeton.
Without repeating a lot that Trustee Thatcher and Trustee Lundquist said, I'd like to say that it has been a long process in a short period of time, condensed, but the number of consultation with people within the FI community has been amazing in the long run. And I too will support this motion, and if we need a seconder for Nick for the motion, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Trustee Templeton. I have a comment and I have a question. Firstly, to Lisa, I appreciate that you are recommending option 1 over option 2, because I feel that students who have attended Donald A. Wilson for 2 years should remain there, because in grade 11 our students are focusing on their marks, thinking post-secondary. My question is this: are we going to be causing overcrowding concerns at St. Clair Secondary in the next few years?
Thank you, Chair Morton. As you can see in the charts that are provided in the report, Sinclair Secondary, which is currently underutilized, it is sitting at approximately 87% occupancy right now, and holding steady in the 87 to 90% if we were to do nothing. But as West Whitby grows, it is inevitable that some of that growth will come to Sinclair. So the small portion that we're relocating from Donald A. Wilson falls in the Robert Munch boundary, and then also the development to the west of that, the former sort of Country Lane area, is coming to Sinclair anyway. Ultimately, this will climb to approximately about 113% occupancy and up to 14 portables by 2026. As we start to approach that and West Whitby is built out, we would be looking to recommend, once sufficient student enrollment exists, a secondary school site in the West Whitby area. 2026 might be a little bit early, but certainly within 10 years. I don't know, Carrie Trombino, if you wanted to sort of give a little more context on timing for West Whitby Secondary.
Yes, we would continue to monitor the numbers, and to give a specific date at this time may be difficult, pending on as the growth continues. We'll have a better idea in meeting the requirements of the ministry, but I would say within approximately 7 to 10 years that that would be definitely on the horizon for potentially for the new school there in West Whitby.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Carrie, for those answers. Do we have any further questions or comments? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. Chair Morton, you somewhat asked the question that I was looking at, is particularly on West Whitby as far as that was concerned. I agree. This is a fulsome report, and the amount of response and consultation. It's not always a comfortable and without anxiety move to change boundaries. I think I was here when we changed boundaries from Sinclair, because Sinclair was overpopulated and we moved programs out of here. Population does change, and I know we try our best in order to keep it as stable as possible, but it does happen. And as programs basically increase, especially French immersion, we do have a very large population of French immersion, so we have to, and we have proven that we want to continue to support that growth. So I do like option 1, and again, thank you for all the work on this consultation. One question though I do have is around supports. At the end, like if this recommendation goes forward, and then what kind of supports are we going to put in both the schools in order to support and build the community for those new students moving into their schools?
Thank you, Trustee Edwards, and through you, Chair Morton. We will certainly work with our partners in programs, and as well as the principals for the various schools. We've also consulted quite extensively with the inclusive student services in the areas of mental health and transitioning, and we have outlined a transition plan towards the end of the report, and we will certainly be acting on that and developing it further should the recommendation go forward.
That answers your question, Trustee Edwards. I don't see any further comments or questions, so I'm turning to page 44, and the recommendation reads like this. It is recommended that, as of the 22-23 school year, the Board of Trustees approve staff option 1. This recommendation would, over a 6-year projection period, result in an average of approximately 37% of the French immersion program at Donald A. Wilson Secondary School being relocated to Anderson Collegiate Vocational Institute through the redirection of the 21-22 grade 8 students holding at Julie Payette Public School and John Dryden Public School, French immersion feeder schools to Anderson CVI for grade 9 in the FI program, and the 21-22 grade 9 class of students that reside within the Julie Payette Public School and John Dryden Public School French immersion feeder school boundaries to Anderson CVI. Over the same projection period, an average of approximately 20% of the regular program at Donald A. Wilson would be relocated to St. Clair through the redirection of the 21-22 grade 8 students that reside within the Robert Munch Public School and holding school students from Ormiston Public School feeder schools to St. Clair for grade 9 in the regular program, and the 21-22 grade 9 class of students that reside within the Robert Munch and the holding area attending Ormiston Public School feeder school boundaries to St. Clair Secondary School. That is the motion. Could I have somebody willing to put forward that motion?
Madam Chair, I believe that Nikki Lundquist
Excuse me,
moved it.
point of order, Trustee Barrett. I actually am going to put that forward. You're interrupting.
No, with all due respect,
the motion has been put forward by Trustee Templeton, and I'm happy to second that motion. Trustee Barrett, does that address your point of order?
Not really, because Trustee Lundquist had moved it and seconded it, and we ignored the motion earlier. So I was just trying to correct it, Trustee Thatcher. But as long as the motion gets put on the floor, the motion was ignored. So I was just trying to correct the process. It's all good as long as the motion goes forward.
I'm sorry, I did not hear that motion coming forward. So the motion
had seconded it as well. So, but I'll leave it to you, Madam Chair.
The motion has been put forward. It has been seconded. If there is no further comment or question, we will vote on that motion. Trustee Lundquist, do you have a question or a comment? Thank you. Christine. I'm going to ask for somebody to help in the counting of those votes, please.
Chair Morton, Trustee Lundquist just put her vote on, so that's clearly 6 now. Or sorry, Trustee Crawford, sorry, I can't see that far, but there's a 6th check mark there, so the motion carries.
Thank you. I now see that 6th check mark. That motion is carried. Thank you kindly. Moving on to the next item on our agenda.
Oh, wait.
I beg your pardon? Moving on to the bell time review, and we will go to Chief Administrative Officer Kelly Mashulin. Kelly, you are there.
Hello, through you, Madam Chair. The DSTS bell time update and report can be found on page 68 of your agenda. At the January 17th, 2022 board meeting, DSTS provided an update to the Board of Trustees concerning regional bell times. 3 possible options were presented, and DSTS launched a bell time consultation process on February 10th of 2022. Part of the consultation included 2 virtual open houses held on February 15th and February 16th. A survey and thought exchange was posted on the DSTS website as part of the consultation process. Overall, there were 2,220 survey participants. and 1,090 thought exchange submissions. As part of the survey, parents and guardians were asked if the bell time change for their school, what would be the impact? 33% indicated positive, 11% indicated neutral, and 56% indicated a negative impact. During the initial consultation review of the feedback received, several secondary respondents expressed an interest in further surveying of the proposed 8 a.m. schools with the option of either an 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. The secondary survey, so this is the second survey that we did, closed on April 3rd. The survey to those 6 secondary schools received 10,509 responses, and 75.5% of the respondents indicated a preference for the 8 a.m. start. The DSTS Governance Committee is recommending option 1 with bell time adjustments for the DDSB elementary and secondary schools as outlined in Appendix A of your report. This option provides the most certainty in being able to cover all routes and provide transportation services and equitable access to education.
Thank you, Kelly. Are there questions or comments for Kelly? Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and thank you for the report and listening to concerns. I'd like to make a pointed note that at least there has been a change between St. Bernadette and Ajax, although the 3:30 end time is still a difficult time around the Bailey, so I appreciate that. But the comments, concerns were addressed, and I appreciate you taking them under consideration. I'm just wondering, though, that, as we did receive a letter from the town of Ajax around traffic concerns, and that what kind of supports do we actually look at when we're looking at congestion and bell time changes? Do we coordinate with the region and the towns in order to ensure that traffic congestion is not, it doesn't have a huge, doesn't necessarily have an impact on the busing times, but it does have an impact in the huge community as far as that's concerned. So I'm just wondering what type of work do we do with our partners, community partners?
We do take into account loading zones, kiss and rides of schools, and as much as we can, traffic volume. The 2 schools you're speaking of are along Bailey, and as you know, that's a main thoroughfare for almost 401 commuter traffic in the area. We did receive a letter from the town of Ajax with respect to the traffic and the proximity of the 2 schools along Bailey, and that's Ajax High School and St. Bernadette, as you mentioned. The situation was discussed at the last DSTS Governance Committee meeting, and staff were asked to conduct safety reviews for the 2 schools. That will be happening sometime in April. And we will be following up again with the DSTS Governance Committee with the outcome of those safety reviews. And there may be consideration for adjusting the St. Bernadette Catholic School times if required.
A follow-up, Trustee Edwards?
Thank you, and again, for taking into consideration the concerns that were raised.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist?
Thank you, Chair Morton. So I have like 2 questions, I think, that are related, and they're, of course, about Whitby Brooklyn schools. So I see that 3 of the high schools would be starting at 9:30, and 2 would be starting at 8 a.m. And I'm a little puzzled by that because it's quite a departure, frankly, an hour and a half. And when I look at it, it's clear to me that that the early start times are happening in postal codes, like in areas where there are definitely sort of higher than average income families, and they're more likely now to be able to access after school employment and you know, after school activities, including athletics, etc. And I'm wondering if we've actually considered the impact of this divergence, this hour and a half difference in the school start times, which I think is quite a dramatic difference, frankly, especially from an equity lens. So I heard reference to equity at the beginning of or at the end of the report that was provided verbally, and I'm just a little bit concerned about the inequity of the situation.
So if I can just provide comment, although there may be more that Associate Director Wright will want to add. We were actually looking at the schools that were previously around the 8 a.m. start time. And the goal was really, if we didn't have to shift that time a large amount, to try to keep those times similar to what they had previous to COVID and the pandemic, and then to adjust the other schools to the later start where we needed to increase the tiering on the vehicles in order to drive down the total number of vehicles. When we mention equitable access to education, we're speaking about the other options that were presented that will likely result in open runs or runs without bus drivers. And then those runs are canceled, meaning that students would have no way to get to school. And part of the survey actually asked individuals about if you didn't have a school bus, what other way would you get to school? And depending upon the respondents, it ranged from 30 to, I believe, 43% said they would have no other way to get to school other than by a school bus.
May I ask a supplemental about that? Because that doesn't make a lot of sense to me from a Brooklyn High School perspective, where I understand not many students are actually bused.
We actually have 10 buses going into Brooklyn High School right now. There is a rural component to that boundary, along with special education runs that would also be affected if we had a bus driver shortage.
Thank you.
Are there other comments or questions? Trustee Barrett, you have your hand up.
I do, indeed. So I just wanted to be able to, again, having sat on the DSTS for many years, I understand, Kelly, the complexity of being able to do bell time review. And I know that the reality is it has to be option one because option two is unaffordable. We don't have $5 to $6.5 million to be able to offer bus passes. Number three is no bell time changes is not an option either because we know that not only bus drivers but teachers, custodians, ECEs were short of most of the components that really be able to contribute to the board and if you excuse the pun, you know, bus drivers really move our school board forward. So I mean, the reality is it has to be option one, and there is going to be some give and take on this. I recognize that even at O'Neill, that an 8:15 start is not exactly what parents were looking for, but I understand as well, just based upon the comments that were made with regards to the connection that was made to the Oshawa trustees, that you know, 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock, there were both issues. But I do recognize, and I don't want to lose the point, is that the reality is that what we are still experiencing, is extreme shortage of labor. But secondly, we also still have a funding model, and I know I sound like a broken record, but we still have a funding model that doesn't really work for transportation. The reality is, with increasing wages and costs, the province hasn't kept up with the ability to be able to fund transportation. We have done since I've sat on this school board, and since we put together the joint consortium together, has been continuously look for ways to be able to save dollars, because the funding model hasn't been changed since I first signed that joint consortium. So I think in 2005, I think it was. So, and you and your predecessors have always had to be able to balance this. So I do understand this is very, very complex, and appreciate the concept of being able to move thousands of students. With some reluctance, only because I recognize the funneling of what we have to do. I will, if not already move that we go forward with option 1 as outlined in the report that you have provided, Kelly. And again, I do thank you for you and your staff's effort. This is moving many chess pieces on a very complex chessboard. Thank you.
Trustee Barrett, did I hear you correctly? You are putting forward that motion?
Correct, on option 1, Madam Chair, yes.
Could I have somebody second that motion? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Further comments? Vice Chair Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. I just want to say that I've read the report. I think there's been a thorough consultation process which has revealed the preferences of our families across the district. I also noted that there was an additional survey done with a number of our secondary schools, and there were actually just a couple of issues that I have I've seen that those issues have been addressed. So I know that option 1 certainly is one that I fully support. I just had a couple of questions, and one was just a question of interest for myself. In Brooklyn, I know that we have Winchester, which has a start time of 8:45, and St. Leo's Catholic School, which is just up the road, at a start time of 8:05. And I guess in my mind, I was thinking we would probably have those times a little closer together, so we could be, I mean, am I missing something? I'm just kind of thinking in terms of bus routes. Would we not be taking students to schools within the same area?
We do, but our focus with this simulation and review was wherever we didn't need to make a change, we didn't make the change. So if we could reformulate the route and maintain the bell times that we had, we would retain those bell times and only shift the bell times that were absolutely necessary in order to re-tier and optimize the buses to a level that sort of matched the number of drivers that we knew we would have available.
Okay, thank you. And just one question. I see that in option 2 that you mentioned, or through you, Chair, I'm sorry, the use of Durham Region Transit to mitigate the service disruption for eligible urban secondary students. And I mean, I am aware that there has been some conversation there. I'm of course very interested in that, because I do feel that there's some tremendous opportunities for both Durham Region Transit and the board. I just wondered if you could expand on that at all.
So that was one of the options. Right now, we're continuing discussions with Durham Region Transit to find out what type of service they could provide to DSTS and to the boards in the short term as well as in the long term.
Okay, thanks.
Trustee Lundquist, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Morton. I just have one question about, again, returning to the Brooklyn High School time specifically. So a consultation was added after the fact because there was some discussion surrounding that. And I don't, and perhaps I've missed it, but I'm looking for some information on that specific school and what the results of that consultation were. It wasn't in my recollection, and I apologize, not being well. It's hard for me to remember all the timing of these pieces, but my recollection was that there was a sort of secondary process that was triggered in this about the Brooklyn High start times, and I'm wondering what results there were related to that.
Kelly, if I may, Trustee Lundquist, if I understood you correctly, and I apologize, there was a little garbling of your comment. Were you talking about the second survey that came out for several specific schools about transitioning away from the 8 a.m. start and moving to a 10 a.m. start?
Yes, I was curious about that as it related to Brooklyn High in particular.
So I'm not sure if we have it broken down by school. Overall, it was overwhelmingly in favor of the 8 a.m. start. It was about 75-25 in favor of the 8 a.m. versus the 10 a.m. Kelly, I'm not sure if we tracked it individually by school.
They did. Most of them range between 70 and 75%. There was one that was a little lower than that, but I don't believe it was Brooklyn High School. I just don't have that in front of me, but they were all about the same in that range.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you. I do have a comment. In option 1, we require 505 buses, but in options 2 and 3, we would need 560 buses. Are we assured that we have bus drivers for the 505 buses?
I believe we should be fine. That's based on what we've had this year and the last year. You know, situations can change, economies can change. If there's certain employers within Durham Region and near us that go on a large hiring spree, maybe transit authorities and other competitors, we may have more challenges to find drivers, but that number there we have been able to consistently recruit for the last 2 years.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm seeing no more questions or comments, so I'm looking at scenario 1, option 1. That's the one that you are recommending, and that's to provide the greatest certainty in being able to cover all routes and provide transportation services to all eligible students and equitable access to education. So the recommendation is on page 73, that the Board of Trustees of the Durham District School Board approve the recommendation of the DSTS Governance Committee and the bell time adjustments for DDSB elementary and secondary schools as outlined in Appendix A, and that information is there. That motion has been put forward. It has been seconded. We have had discussion, and it is now time to vote. And that motion has passed. Thank you. Moving on now to our information items, and we have a notice of motion coming forward. I'm going to go to the Chair of Governance, Trustee Michael Barrett. Trustee Barrett?
Yes, thank you, Chair Morton. There are 2 notice of motions that are coming forward. They are information items. I know there are come with recommendations, but there is no need to be able to actually put this forward as a motion. They are serving as notice of motion as per our process. There are 2 policies that are coming forward. And the first one is the draft Human Rights, Anti-Discrimination, Anti-Racism Policy that is found on page 90. We weren't going to be able to go over this tonight. It is a notice of motion. However, what we had talked about at the governance committee was being able to look that if there is any other feedback, this is the draft that's coming forward out of the governance committee. If there is any further feedback, that could be submitted and be able to be sent to staff and perhaps myself as the chair, so that we could potentially incorporate any further changes that might be made. But as mentioned, it has gone through the governance committee. So, Madam Chair, that is the first notice of motion that is coming forward to our May board meeting.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Would you like to address the second notice of motion at the same time?
Certainly would do that as well. The second notice of motion is for the revised safe and respectful workplace and harassment prevention policy that has also come through the governance committee, and it is coming forward to the next board meeting, the May board meeting. Similar process, Madam Chair. If there's any revisions or changes once the document has gone through and the changes, etc., are included in both policies, please forward those so that we could potentially have any of the changes made or suggested at the next board meeting. So, Madam Chair, that is the second notice of motion that's coming forward as well, and that one's on page 179, starting on page 179. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At our May board meeting then, we will be looking at the draft human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy. We will also be dealing with the revised safe and respectful workplace and harassment prevention policy. Thank you, Chair Barrett, for bringing those forward. Moving on to 14C, I'm looking for a report from SEAC, and we'll go to Trustee Edwards for that. Trustee Edwards.
The report from the meeting of February 17th from SEAC is on pages 200 to 209, and that's my report, Chair Morton.
Nothing further regarding SEAC? Looking at the OPSPA report, and Trustee Barnes is not here, so I'm wondering if there is another member who would like to provide her report. And I think it's going to be Trustee Edwards. Oh, we're waiting. There we go.
Sorry. It's fairly short, just that the Labor Relations Symposium is being held April 28th virtually, and that it is usually attended by board staff and trustees, and there'll be two specific workshops for trustees titled Role and Responsibilities in Labor Relations and Collective Bargaining for Trustees, so that they can understand their role in the bargaining process as the new round begins. As well as the registration for the OPSPA AGM held in Ottawa June 9th to 11th is open. Along with that, the call for nominations has been set, and the due date for all nominations is May 2nd. You can go online to register. And if you are planning to go, I'm understanding that the hotel rooms are going fast because it is in person. And you can also, when you're there, see what the latest developments are on the program. But we will be, one of the speakers will be Nick Nanos research. We'll be breaking down which will be then the recently held provincial election with respect to our key priorities and advancing education.
I think I've heard Nick Nano speak at our symposium in Toronto, and I was very impressed with that. Any further comments or questions? I urge you to look at the correspondence, which is in your agenda package. And if there is no further business, consider this meeting to be adjourned. Good evening, everybody.
Good night, everyone.